Hello everybody, welcome back to the Norries podcast. Before we get into it there, we just want to remind people that we're supported through Danny Donovan at quickminutes.com.
Yeah, Danny's a very good friend of both myself and James. He comes from the north side as well, and he grew up locally, and he's been a massive supporter of the podcast and both myself and James since we actually began. And he has his own company called Quick Minutes now, and
quickminutes.com is a meeting management application for semi-formal and formal meetings. And look, if you want to know more about that, quickminutes.com, and supporting Danny's supporting us. So if you're interested in that, check them out and enjoy the rest of the podcast. Hello everybody and welcome back to the Two Norries podcast. I'm your host James, and I'm joined as always by my good friend Timmy Long.
Hi everyone.
Sean is on the switch. Just say hi, Sean.
How's it going?
And our guest today is a Kerry lady, Grace Alice. Is sex and relationships expert, is it?
Yeah, well, sex and intimacy specialist.
Intimacy specialist. Better
It's a
again.
mouthful.
Better again.
Yeah,
It's an
yeah,
interesting. It's an interesting title to have. Before we get into it, just for the people that don't know you, where are you from? Where did you grow up?
Yeah, so I'm from Milltown, so that's where I grew up. So for anyone that doesn't know, it's kind of mid-Kerry. So kind of, I always think of it as between Dingle and Killarney, two great towns.
Yeah.
My mum is actually from Dublin, and she moved down to Kerry with my dad. So yeah, and then I moved away to Cork for 5 years when I went to college. So
Did you go to UCC or CIT?
I did UCC, yeah.
What did you study?
Occupational therapy.
Oh, interesting.
So yeah, initially the plan was to go down that route, like go into healthcare. But I'm sure we'll get into that anyway. You know, it kind of didn't really end up going the straightforward route, but I'm glad I didn't.
How was it growing up for you, Grace?
Good, yeah, like I was thinking about this when I was actually driving here, because I was listening to other episodes of the podcast and people talking about their childhood and everything, and like, you know, I suppose like everyone, there was good and bad. My parents are separated now and they're great, like they're both wonderful. They just weren't necessarily, you know, good as partners. They're great parents. So growing up, like, that was tough. Like they you know, they didn't really have a really loving relationship, and that so that was kind of hard. I think from the outside as a teenager, I think I looked like I had everything sorted. Like, I always had a boyfriend, I always had friends, I did really well in school, to be honest. Like, I did. I worked hard, like, but I did do well. You know, I didn't have any great difficulties that way. But I had really bad anxiety. I was actually diagnosed with depression 3 weeks before my leaving cert. And I don't think anyone from the outside, again, would have just even seen that, maybe.
People on the outside look like, oh, she has it together,
Yeah.
smart, pretty, you know, stable environment, but actually that wasn't the case.
No, yeah,
'Cause
exactly.
like, depression is a big diagnosis to get 3 weeks out from the biggest thing in your childhood, you know.
I'd also say the leaving cert had a lot to do with that too. The amount of pressure that's on it.
There is. I mean, there's
know?
way too much pressure. Like, there is that. But the thing is, from my memory, I wasn't overly worried about the exams themselves. Now, I wasn't like, oh, I'll be fine, you know. But I kind of, like, you know, unfortunately, the school system is not designed for all kinds of learners, but it is designed for people like me. Like, it was fine for me, do you know, like, being honest about it. I could learn things off and regurgitate them, you know. But it was funny because when I went to the doctor, then it was 3 weeks before, he said mild depression. So whatever that, I mean, that's subjective, right? Like, what? And I suppose in that sense, because I was very high functioning, for want of a better term, like that, I was able to kind of go about my day and whatnot. But like inside, I was just like...
Had you stuff going on outside of school in your life? Like,
yeah.
It'd be tough for somebody growing up as a teenager as well, with
100%, yeah.
friends and girls and boys, you know.
Yeah, I think for me, there was a few things. Like, there was stuff with my parents, and the home life was difficult. Like, that was hard. I have been anxious for as long as I can remember. Like, I can remember being an anxious 5-year-old. I was just a worrier of a child. And, you know, I've just kind of always been that way. And there's kind of reasons for that, I think. Like my parents, they had a stillborn baby right before me. Well, not right before me, but, you know, like say 2 or 3 years before me. So I was a high risk pregnancy. So from the beginning, there was all this kind of like, I suppose, anxiety around me and keeping me safe and keep me healthy. And, you know, you absorb that as a child. And but then I was finding myself in really just unhealthy relationships with boys, like with you know, the opposite sex during my teens. And that definitely played a part as well. Like my self-worth was very low. I had disordered eating as well. I didn't have an eating disorder, but I engaged in disordered eating. So like I wouldn't eat for hours and hours and hours. And then I'd eat at home. I didn't like to be seen eating. I developed, and I had panic attacks in class. All these kind of things going on.
That must have been difficult,
Yeah, like they were all just, I think, symptoms of anxiety, symptoms of depression/anxiety coming out in different ways. But I had no understanding of...
When you're looking for external stuff to soothe it.
Yeah,
with
exactly.
boys and food and stuff like that.
Exactly. And I had a condition as well. It's called Vaginismus, and if there's women that, I'm sure there's lots of women that listen to this podcast, it's quite common now, but it wasn't talked about for a long time. So similarly to when a man has erectile dysfunction, or he can't get hard, he can't get erect, I like the muscles in the vagina don't relax, they actually tense up, they tighten, and it's out of your control, it's involuntary, you know. And I figured out I had that from age, it was about 13 or 14. So I tried to use tampons, couldn't. It was just like, just that part of my body was just so
Tensed.
Now other parts of my body were tense too. You know, we hold so much tension, but I was so surprised to see, why isn't this working for me? Like it seems to be working for everyone else. So that meant I couldn't, you know,
Be intimate.
I couldn't have sex. I couldn't, you know, I could kiss, I could touch, I could, you know, there's oral sex, whatever. And that's all great. But my body wasn't doing what I wanted to do, what I wanted it to do. And again, there was so little information on it. There was so little support for it. It was so isolating.
Did you have somebody to talk to about it when you were younger?
The only person I really talked to was my mum, who, again, was great, but like she didn't know what it... She kind of thought it was just the normal, oh, you're just maybe nervous and it'll get easier as you get older and whatnot, which it wasn't. It was more than that, you know. It is an actual condition, you know, and it went on for years. And I think that really affected my self-worth, and I think that's why, a big part of why I ended up in very unhealthy and one particularly abusive relationship, because I suppose it affected my self-worth to like, oh, I can't give a man sex, so whoever will have me, you know, whoever will love me, I'll give my love to them, or I'll give whatever I can to them. Which was really,
sad.
You can see how that leads you into the
must have
wrong
been tough,
arms completely, do you know.
We got sent a couple of copies of Gabor Mate's new book there, The Myth of Normal. But I was listening to it on Audible there recently. But he speaks about psychosomatic conditions.
Yeah.
And he says, like, not psychosomatic in like the pop psychology meaning, which can be undermining for people. It's like, oh, you don't really have a condition, it's all in your head. But he says, no, psychosomatic is like the connection between the mind and the body.
Yeah.
And if there's something wrong with the mind, it affects the biology in a real
Absolutely.
way.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
do you think that maybe the anxiety, like when we had a guest on here before, she went through her life full of anxiety and fear, but everything was okay. But only in her 50s or 60s during lockdown did she figure out that she went through a very traumatic pregnancy and childbirth. And she was able to tap into that and then kind of overcome the physical stuff, you know?
Yeah.
It's like fibromyalgia as well. It's very
Yeah.
similar to fibromyalgia, where something may have happened, the
To
body,
trigger it, yeah.
you know, you may not remember as an adult, but there's pain consistently coming up, and you actually don't even know where it happens a lot for both men and women,
And all
particularly
that
men.
energy
women.
is trapped in the body, isn't it?
It's trapped, and it sometimes it can be back pain, hips, legs,
Yeah.
particularly
Come out
back,
somewhere, yeah,
back
yeah.
mostly. And I suppose one of the main areas of healing for it is to actually be able to meet whatever that experience was that stopped you at that period of your life, you know. And we had a lady on, and she spoke about it in detail, and she'd never known that something had happened to her as a young child. And when she realised that she was feeling the way she was, and she had the fibromyalgia over this, it was gone within 2 or 3 weeks.
Wow.
What's the name of the condition you have again?
Vaginismus. Now, thankfully, I don't have it anymore.
How did you work through that?
So, yeah, I did get treatment for it, and I'll definitely speak on that. But just to go back to what you said, because I think it is, you're so right, and it's important that like the connection between the mind and the body, and you know, we have a tendency sometimes to treat, for example, vaginismus, so tightening of the, you know, the vaginal muscles. You know, we have this condition, or sorry, this tendency to look at the physical or completely separate almost. Okay, it's either psychological or it's physical, and it can be both. And you know, over the years, I've done a lot of therapy, I've reflected on things, and I think there's a few things that contributed to it. Some things are unique to me. Like I had an incident when I was about 3 or 4 where I fell on the bar of a tricycle. And I remember I had a little bit of bleeding. So that obviously was a trauma at that young age in that area. I remember the pain. I actually remember where I was. My dad had a bakery. I was in the bakery, and I remember the blinding pain where you can't breathe or speak. And I was on a tricycle, like I was only 3 or 4. So there was things like that happened, but also there's a reason so many women have this. Like it's a cultural thing as well, because I was told by films, by books, by my peers that for women sex would hurt and I would bleed, that's what happens, and you just need to get through it, you need to push through it. Now that I'm a sex educator and special, I know that there's no actual truth in that. There's no need for sex to hurt. Sex can hurt, but it doesn't have to hurt. So I was going in, you know, as a, you know, reading or coming across these references as a child, and then developing as a sexual being, and then realizing I actually want to have sex. But like that idea had been planted that it was going to be painful years before. So of course my body was like, well, we don't want that.
Stiffening up.
It's literally closing up. Like, you're not getting in here. We're not letting someone in. It's like, you know, if something goes down your throat the wrong way, your throat closes up and you gag. It's the same concept. Somewhere my body decided that penetration, when you think about it, leaving someone inside your body is such an intimate act. It's such a vulnerable act that we take for granted, you know. So somewhere along the way, my brain, my body, whatever, the whole system decided this is too risky. We need to like protect Grace from this. So then when, I suppose with treatment, I had a lot of therapy, a lot of talking through this stuff. But I also did, because mine was quite severe, you can get different, you know, severities of the condition. But I actually had to go to the States for treatment. And what they did was they actually injected Botox into the vaginal muscles, and that stopped them, like in your forehead, it stops the muscles contracting. And it wears away. Sure, the Botox has been gone years and years. It only lasts a few months. But it allowed me to kind of start getting physical treatment then. So it gave me a bit of control back over my, and to be fair, I'm so lucky, like I haven't had any issues since. But for the 8 years I had it, it was awful, like so awful. I always say, you know, when I'm talking to men about it, I'm like, imagine having, you know, erectile dysfunction for 8 years. But there's also pain. And there's loads of research on erectile dysfunction. There's medication over the counter now.
I've never heard of that.
Yeah, and you wouldn't, because women's bodies are so under-researched. Like, historically, there's not as much research at all. Thankfully, things are changing.
Timmy's dog is in the audience, but he's snoring.
He's bored.
The old King Charles.
He's snoring over the couch there.
It's actually soothing. It's really, really relaxing sound.
But so you know, when you had the Botox, that helped you relax. Then that helped you to have regular experiences. Did you think that reprogrammed your mind then around what that should be like, and then helped?
It's literally reprogramming, because it gave me that essentially that grace period where the muscles cannot contract. So you can have sex, and you can use these different, they're called dilators. They're kind of just these little, you put them inside your vagina. They're almost like kind of tampon shaped. There's different sizes. And all of that, it reprograms that kind of messaging that, okay, penetration is happening, I'm safe, it's all good. Now, it wasn't pleasurable for a while. Like, when I first started having sex, I was like, was this it? But then, you know, that can happen. But the main thing was it wasn't painful. It wasn't uncomfortable anymore. But, you know, so many women, because I work with couples, but I also work with women, but I work with all genders of young people in schools. Like, there is still this dialogue around women and sex and that, and pain. Like, it's just going to be painful, and, you know, you just have to push through it.
Endure it rather than enjoy it.
It's still to this day that is still persisting. And, you know, I know we've talked about porn a little bit on this podcast, because I've heard you talk about it, and like, you know, what used to be quite niche porn, because look, everyone's into different things. I never shame anyone if you're into any kind of aggressive this, that, the other. But now it's so normalized that actually aggression during sex, particularly again, like on women, it's the norm now in that kind of media.
I got an anecdote of a nurse one time. She works in the hospital, and it was around young girls presenting to the A&E with anal penetration, no lube,
tears.
because the boys look at the porn and they think like that this you can actually do this to a girl and it's acceptable, but not understanding, you know, the preparation that goes into the set, but it's recorded, and that can be very harmful to the girl.
Of course.
And but it's just a lack of education, and young people get their education from Pornhub and places like it, which is a dangerous place to be.
Of course, and then, you know, the other, so boys look at this and maybe they think, right, you know, you don't see all the stuff that's happening off camera, like the hours of production that go into, say, a 20-minute clip. But, you know, and then on the other side of that, and I know I'm being very heteronormative here, because this happens in gay couples as well, and it happens to all, you know, people of all sexualities, but girls then don't know how to speak up for ourselves and say, no, actually, I need to use lube, or I need more, like, a woman's body takes roughly about 20 minutes to warm up enough for penetration, whereas men, if they get an erection, it's kind of seconds. So if you think of it like a microwave versus an oven, like, you know, built a bit differently. We just need to, like, learn about each other's bodies. And as you said, look, porn, and I'm never, even when I'm talking to young people, I'm never ever going to shame anyone for watching, for being, curiosity is so normal. But the reason they're turning to porn, though, is because they're not getting it. They're not getting sex education elsewhere. They're not getting enough of it. Porn itself, I don't think, is the heart of the problem. Porn is a reflection on society that, you know, demand supply. It's there for a reason. But we need to have really comprehensive sex ed, like, age appropriate, obviously, but from a young age, in bits and pieces, build on it all the time.
We spoke there off camera about an ethical porn industry. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so, and like, look, just say I'm definitely not an expert on this, but I suppose I probably know more than maybe your average person about it. But there are options, like there are places, websites you can get your porn that are more ethical. And what that means is it's produced more ethically. Now, the stuff you see on screen could be just as, you know, aggressive or wild as any other site, but that's not what it's about.
But they're going to be paid. They're going to be above age.
Yeah. So they're going to be of age. They're going to, like any other job, sign a contract, you know, kind of sick leave, like that kind of thing, because it's work, you know, sex work is work in that industry. If they're, you know, a porn performer is a worker just like any of us. But the thing with ethical porn is you pay for it. Makes sense. You have to pay for it, for the, you know, the money to, whereas Pornhub and all these are free. So these ethical sites, and look, I'm not going to even name any, because I'd need to go and research them and make sure they are actually ethical. There's probably sites claiming to be ethical that aren't. But they're against these giants like Pornhub and RedTube and all these that are like, they actually pull content from those sites and put them on their own for free.
Do you know some of the girls in the videos in those sites are talking about the non-ethical sites or the unethical sites? Is it possible that some of those girls out there consensually, they might have been trafficked, or they might be under the age of 18?
Oh, 100%. You never know what you're looking at. Like, if you think of, I mean, how many videos are even on Pornhub? I've no idea. I'm sure millions.
Probably
I imagine
billions.
millions, maybe even more. So, like, you know, how do we know what we're looking at? Like, you know, okay, there's some porn performers that are quite famous. and you can see it's kind of in a studio, you know, it's like whatever. But then
That's a tiny fraction of the
that's only,
content.
but a lot of this kind of amateur stuff, you don't know what conditions that person is living in, what brought them there, how they're being treated, all of that. So, look, it's a really messy, complex industry. It's a complex topic. I think for me and my work, it would be always bringing it back to, you know, if I have a client, I'm like, okay, what's your relationship to it? How do you feel? Is it affecting your, you know, do you think it's affecting your relationship or whatever it is?
You said you did occupational therapy in UCC. I only found out very recently what occupational therapy is, because in my role I get referred people from community health networks, in dietitians, occupational therapists, public health nurses, and people like that. But the way they explained it to me was a very simple way. It was like, if you used to be able to do everyday tasks before, but now you find it difficult to do those tasks, then an occupational therapist will try and support you.
Yeah.
Is that a fair enough assessment?
That's brilliant, because it's so hard to explain to people. Honestly, sometimes people still ask me and I'm like, how do I? So that's basically it. And in that way, it's quite similar to coaching. You know, coaching is becoming a big thing now, life coaching, business coaching, and I have a qualification in sex coaching. It doesn't mean I go into people's bedrooms and like literally coach
Slap
them.
his arse. Go on, boy, fair play.
Have you ever been asked that by couples to actually sit down during maybe them having sex and be able to kind of show them
There
what
are
to do?
people who do that. Like, there are people who do that,
Are
but
there?
that's not my role. No, I haven't been asked. Kind of in indirect ways. I've been kind of, you know, people would be like, yeah, so, and would you do this now? But yeah, so with occupational therapy then, when I did it, it was 4 years in UCC. It was a great course, but like sex was hugely missing from it. You think about it, if you have God forbid, a stroke, a brain injury, a car accident, whatever, yes, of course, you're going to be concerned with how do I walk again? How do I eat? How do I... But like sex, I know I'd be thinking about it. Will I be able to be sexual again? Will I be able to masturbate or have sex with my partner? And that was just... It was kind of... I think someone brought it up one day and we were kind of told, oh yeah, you just approach it like any other activity. And... to me, I'm like, it's different though. It's a much more delicate, sensitive area. So that's, I think, for me, because especially at that age, I was in college and I was, because I'd had the treatment as well. So I was actually starting to have sex and a few different partners and whatever. So sex was a big part of my life. Hopefully it always will be. If I go to the right nursing homes. We were saying that earlier. But... yeah, so for me, I was kind of like, this is kind of missing here, like, you know. So that's then, after I did like the OT, the occupational therapy, I went into a master's in health promotion. And with that, again, I just felt drawn towards the sexual health promotion side of it. And basically, I took an unpaid placement as part of the course to deliver sex ed in schools. And I just loved it. I just thought it was great. I just thought it was so important. It was so vastly different to what I got in school, which was just don't have sex and here's a tampon, you know. That was...
And
like
we were speaking earlier there about going into schools.
Yes.
Yeah. And even some of the pictures on your book. Which we'll speak about later on. They're very graphic, you know, you can see everything. And I was saying, I asked you, do the kids get a little bit embarrassed? And we were talking about, and the kids actually, they might get a little bit, but it's actually the teachers, the older generation they get more embarrassed because like I'm presuming, I know that when they probably went to school back in their 90s or 80s or whatever, there was no such thing as any form of sex education to what we have today.
No.
You know, and their understanding of sex is completely different. You know, so how do we actually change all that going forward? Do we introduce more of what you have in the book and bring sex education like that into the classrooms? Or do we just keep going with the traditional method of the birds and the bees, you know, the really simple method that's there?
Or maybe sex education for the parents as well.
Yes. Yeah, that's the thing. It's really hard to teach what you haven't been taught yourself. And
Yeah.
like, you know, when I say teachers getting comfortable, like I do empathize with them. Like it's kind of funny sometimes, you know, because you'll be in a school in like East Jesus Nowhere and you'll be talking about the clitoris for like 15 minutes and you've some fella at the back of the class being like, oh, jeez. But like, and the students will be looking back at him as well to see, you know, the reaction. So you have a bit of fun with it, like. But I think we need, and if people are listening to this and they feel uncomfortable, or you know, I would say lean into that discomfort. It's not a bad thing to feel uncomfortable. Like change doesn't happen in comfortable. So we do need sex education from a young age. Now we don't need to necessarily talk about sex with young children. What we do need is to teach them the names of their body parts. Yeah. Like literally, I saw another sex educator. Her daughter did this little video on Instagram, and she had this. It's actually really cute. It's this cushion, and it's in the shape of a vulva and a vagina and a clitoris. So all the basically the assigned female at birth bits, and she was like, and this is the labia minora and this is the labia majora, and it was actually, I actually got emotional watching it because I was like, that young girl is going to grow up with knowledge about her body, and that is so empowering about how it works, and that again, that's leading back to the pain thing. When you actually know how it all works, then sex doesn't have to hurt. It actually can be pleasurable.
It's not a mystery then, you know.
Yeah, it demystifies it, and there's nothing dirty or inappropriate about body parts. They're just body parts. A child has a vagina and an adult, and they're used for different, you know, they're not used as a child, but like, you know, someday the child will grow up to be an adult and maybe want to have sex or want to have children or whatever. So it's just another body part, and like the penis, whatever. So I do think that like it is about talking from a young age in an age appropriate way, you know, when they're younger. So talk about the body parts, talk about boundaries, about consent, about different types of intimate relationships, because friendships are intimate, about how to process rejection. That's a huge thing that I think particularly young men need stuff around, is processing rejection without lashing out and shaming women, you know, that it's okay, everyone gets rejected.
Because it can be a real kick in the ego.
Of course it can, yeah. It feels horrible, yeah.
How do what are some of the bigger questions that couples come to you asking? Like where do they need most of their help from? Where do they lack knowledge around?
Yeah, so mainly couples would come because there is the fancy term is desire discrepancy, and it basically means one person wants it more than the other. You know, there's
usually the man over the woman.
Not necessarily.
Really?
No,
I would have thought.
And like that does happen.
Want it more, like
pleasure the women more.
No, like they say no, like, and
Men
I'm not talking about my own relationship here, but a man theoretically could have sex
You just winked
every day of the week, whereas the woman might want it one day of the week. Do you know what I mean? But I'd say, and you said it earlier on, a man is good to go as soon as the woman gives him the indication. But for a woman, it's a bit different.
Yeah.
It's like the microwave and the oven piece.
Yeah, and like, say for instance, a couple, right? And again, as James said there, I'm not talking about my own relationship here.
Yes. Disclaimer.
But so for example, a couple, and say, their needs. If the man wants to really, really pleasure his wife or partner or whoever more, like, what's the whole process? Do they need to get some form of counselling with somebody like yourself and to set out some form of structure around it? You know, is it a bigger process where you have to sit down with both of them and talk about how the sex life is now and what's missing and what's needed more? Is it more foreplay here for her or for him, or you know, because that's a big deal, because for most men it's like about jumping in, getting it done and getting out.
How romantic to me.
Listen.
How erotic.
The reality of it is that, and we both know it. It is like that, but it's not, because sometimes a woman probably feels like they don't feel like that they're after being respected. You know, if
I think a woman. I know you can disprove us all.
me and James know are completely naive to this stuff. So anybody listening,
I
do
think
not.
a woman likes a bit of a ceremony around it. Maybe like soft music, light a candle, some kissing and intimacy before actual penetration, sex. You know, whereas I think a man would be happy to skip all that other stuff and go straight.
Can be,
what do you think?
Yeah. So I suppose, I mean, genuinely it does differ. Like we're talking about, it's not that what you're saying is wrong, but we're talking about, I suppose, stereotypes here around men and women.
Yeah.
And then, see, the issue with that is, that's what then compounds the shame around the issue. So if you have a couple and if it's a woman that wants it more, which I often see, the woman feels her needs aren't being met, but maybe, because there's so many reasons our desire might dip.
Her needs now might be orgasm, more
Just having sex
orgasms.
regularly, maybe is the sex actually connected, or is she having, like, is it fulfilling sex? Is it actually enjoyable sex? Is she having these things can feed into it. But so say if it is a woman that, like, let's say has a higher libido or higher sex drive, and your drive can go up and down through your whole life for different reasons, she can feel an extra layer of shame then, because she's thinking, God, like, most women are just happy with less than I am, and here I'm greedy, I want loads. And then the man feels extra shame because he's like, I'm a man, I'm supposed to want sex all the time. I don't want sex at all. Another man could probably please her better. So we have to be really careful about the stereotypes of men and women, and they're there a long time, these stereotypes, and you're not wrong in when you say kind of a ceremony. I love that word, because women can, and again, not all women, I have to always say that, but women can, like, get more from the story when it comes to sex. So kind of the foreplay leading up during the day. Like, foreplay happens, it's not just the 20 minutes of oral or whatever, like,
laying the foundation with the text messages that morning,
Or it's, or it's complimenting how someone looks, or it's like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whereas men, from my understanding, they're a little bit more visual. So it's kind of, they and again, kind of can get generally aroused a little bit quicker, generally speaking.
Yeah.
So like when I meet a couple, I usually talk to them separately first, and then I do sessions with them together, like as a couple. And I just love all the couples I work with. I just think they're great. And I just admire anyone who goes, because there's such, like, you talk so much on this podcast about mental health. It's so less stigmatized now to go for counselling or go for therapy. Couples therapy is still hugely stigmatized.
Isn't it a great progressive step that a couple would actually go about it?
It is.
Rather than just break up or just persist with less than what they deserve.
Yeah. And there's,
It brings a lot of trust to a relationship as well, doesn't it?
100%. Like, it's kind of like, I remember I did an Instagram post before, and I was like, people assume if you're going to couples therapy, they're on the edge of divorce, like they're on the edge of breaking up. And I always say, like, if you saw someone in a dentist, you wouldn't be like, they're about to lose all their teeth now. You'd think, maybe they're getting a checkup. Like, our relationship, surely of all things in life, our relationship deserves time and effort, and yes, money. If you are going to specialists, you spend a little bit of money on your sessions. If you want a long-term, if you're in this for a long-term commitment, whatever, it makes total sense that you might need to check in now and then and have a little chat and work on something.
Yeah, and make the best of your sex life as well.
Exactly, because it is so important.
And I suppose there's a lot of, a lot of people would have a little bit of shame around, I don't know, women maybe using sex toys, but it's really about finding out how much more pleasurable life can be, your sex life. And there's no shame in actually adventuring safely, with your husband or your wife or your partner or whoever. Can you explain a little bit about around that, why women might have some shame associated around maybe using a sex toy? Some women have none, they'll just whatever, but what about women that would have a little bit of shame around sex toys?
I would say the shame is less about sex toys and more about pleasure, full stop.
Okay.
I think women are socialized to be, how would I put this? Women are socialized to give, to nurture, to care. That's the role women have been given over years. And that's fine if you want to do that. That's lovely. Like, I'm not giving out about that. There's lovely sides to that. But you know, women have not been encouraged for a long time to actually speak up for themselves and say, actually, I want this or I need this. In general, I think, I truly believe that. I think, and I'm not saying it doesn't happen to men, I'm just talking about women right now, because again, that was your question. And I think women like that have been, again, socialized to think that sex is done to them, not with them. And it's quite a flip the script moment when you kind of realize, wait, I should be getting just as much out of this as he is, or she is, or whoever you're, you know. So with that, then I think comes in that shame around maybe saying, oh yeah, can we use a sex toy, or can we do this, or can just asking for something. I think women actually find difficult, because I think it can go against the way we're conditioned, you know. You're kind of, and I know you might disagree with this or not, but you know, a lot of my friends will be women, and we always say, like, you're kind of brought up to, like, just not make a fuss. Like, don't be a bitch, don't be a drama queen, don't be a diva. There's all these words for women who ask for things or who speak up. There's not as many words for men who, you know, what would you call a man who is demanding?
A bitch.
You wouldn't, like, I can't think off the top of my head. There's not a word like diva, right?
No,
you know?
it's a masculine thing to do it. You know what I mean? It wouldn't be frowned upon.
Exactly. It's dominant, and young boys again are being brought up to think, you know, again, to be a man means to be dominant, whatever. So what was I saying? Yeah. So I think with sex toys, like, that can come into it. It's just, and there's shame then. Oh, hello, doggy. Coming over for the chat about sex toys. There is shame then on, again, if it's a heterosexual relationship, men thinking these sex toys are almost like a threat, but like, as I was saying before, sex toys, you know, they're your teammates, they're not your rivals or competitors. The goal should be pleasure, the goal should be enjoyment. And if something with a battery helps, why not use it? Like, honestly, if it makes the experience even better, why not? You know.
And what would you say to men? Would you say to men that do have problems with sex toys, their wives or girlfriends using them? Maybe encourage them.
Yeah.
Encourage them and be
Curiosity
happy.
wouldn't kill the cat.
Be happy for them to maybe be happy for their women to be more confident around you, because some women aren't confident enough to use sex toys around men. You know, be confident about it and get involved in the whole process and try to enjoy it and overcome that initial bit of shame that you might have. Oh, I wasn't taught to do this kind of stuff, you know. We have the Catholic culture in this country that's intergenerational. It's been there as long as we can remember. And the church, and we're always told to, sex only when you're married.
Remember the film Kevin and Perry Go Large?
Yeah.
With Kevin's mum and dad, he's telling did you ever see it?
No.
Kevin and Perry Go Large is very good. It's around 2002, and it's a real. They're in Ibiza, and it's a real, like, rave scene. But there's a brilliant soundtrack to the movie. But it's comedy, like. But he's explaining to his friend is onto him about his mum having sex. He heard him.
Yeah.
He says, "My mum and dad only ever had sex once," and he's remembering it.
Yeah.
But it's like the two of them are sitting in an ugly bed. They go over 2 pumps, that's it. The two of them vomit into a bowl and go to sleep. And that was the only time they ever did it. But it's a bit like that, you know, with the Catholic Church, you know what I mean? That's it. You do it to procreate, but that's it. There's no pleasure that will come from it.
It should be missionary, in the dark, 3 minutes, cry afterwards.
Yeah.
Or pray or whatever.
You mentioned about libido a while ago, and I wanted to touch on that, because libido can go up and down, as you said, throughout your life. Libido, like, has many meanings, but in this context, it's your sex drive.
Yeah.
But for men, it can be due to testosterone, and that can go up and down because of obesity. I'm reading a book at the moment, Why We Eat Too Much, and it's about obesity and just diet and nutrition in general. But, like, for people that are obese, it can affect your hormone profile in a negative way. Another thing, and then that can bring psychological issues. Like, if you don't feel good about yourself, you might not want to be intimate. You know, so, like, it's not that you're less of a man or less of a woman. It's just like, that's how you are on that day, and that's okay too.
Yeah, 100%. Like, how you feel about yourself in general can hugely affect your sex drive, for want of a better word. Like, if you're feeling, you know, like stress is the biggest libido killer in a way. 100% stress. And like, you know, what do you say to people? Just don't be stressed. Like, it's hard, you know, you go through stressful periods of your life. So I would say, number one, you know, if there's anyone listening and if things have been a bit quiet in that area, like, don't despair straight away at all. It doesn't mean the relationship's over. It doesn't mean you're less of a man or woman. It's just, it's just all such bullshit. Like, we just have so much shame around this. You just can't win, you know. You're shamed for having too much sex, too little sex, this kind of sex, using this like
another thing
there's
as
just
well
so much
for
shame
people
there.
to be aware of as well, you know, victims of sexual abuse, like they can be hypersexual, meaning they want to have a lot of it, or they can be hyposexual, meaning they don't want, and like it's not like she won't put out or something like that. Maybe if you're with a girl that doesn't want to be intimate like that, maybe instead of giving out, or maybe try and inquire, think about what experience has that person had, or if you think about, you know, the partner that wants to have sex a lot, but it's just like different experiences in your life can channel you down a type of a path as well, you know.
100%.
But do you get people that have kind of those past experiences come to you for support?
Yeah, they do. And like, now I'm not a psychotherapist, like that's not my background. So I'm really careful about, you know, my job isn't, I'm trauma informed, but I'm not trauma certified. So if someone,
good way of putting it, actually.
Yeah. So if someone's coming to me, I mean, unfortunately, most women do have something in their past. Like, I've unfortunately several assaults in my past, and they're part of my story as well. And they've definitely affected my relationships and sex life at times. So while I wouldn't be delving into the real depths of it with a client, let's say, I would be kind of referring them to therapy for that. But if they have kind of done some work around it and it's part of their story, yes, like, we would talk about that. And it's so important for people to feel safe. You know, if you have been assaulted, it's so important for people to feel safe with a partner, safe in the knowledge that, you know, you will be heard if you say no, safe in the concept of that you can communicate, you can talk. Some people who have been through particularly sexual trauma, they can actually when they're actually being intimate, they can almost switch off, disconnect a bit, and actually struggle to speak, to verbalize. So then what that is you talk to your partner beforehand and you say, look, if I grip your arm really hard, it means stop. If I tap your shoulder, it means we need to and none of this can happen without communication. So you can see how, and I'm not anti-casual sex at all, like, it can be absolutely brilliant, but, you know, it's very hard to build, for a lot of people, that trust and that communication with someone that you've just met, or so then, you know, it is really important for people when they are in relationships or new relationships. And look, even if they are casual, like friends with benefit relationships, whatever, it is what it is. The communication still has to be there.
Yeah. Tell us about the book.
Yes, the book. So the book is called Sex Educated. And I wrote that because at the end of every session that I do in school, I ask the students to write anonymous questions, and then I come back and I answer them during our next session. And I just thought, like, it was my favourite part. It's my favourite part of teaching, getting the anonymous questions, because I'm always like, oh, this will give me an insight now into what's going on. What do they want to know? Some questions are heartbreaking, some are hilarious, some are just messers, some are really intelligent. You know, you just get such a broad range of questions. And I was like, we just need to do something with them. Like, we're sitting on all this, and this is like a huge research project, essentially, that we're just doing anyway.
Is it secondary school students or both?
So I go to primary schools as well, but this is mainly based on secondary school. Yeah, so
that's when they're most curious, really, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it's where you're talking about it most. So they're coming on, maybe they're starting to see things like porn or whatever,
and their bodies are changing.
Exactly, puberty is a huge deal. So I wrote the book, which is basically, it's a Q&A format, so it's questions and answers. So there's hundreds of questions in there. Myself and a few other sex educators as well, who are brilliant, contributed to it, and it answers all of the questions. So either a teenager themselves can read it, or a parent can read it, a teacher can read it. We get all ages wanting to get it. But it is, and the illustrations, as you said, I don't think there's hardly any out there like it. They are so they're inclusive, they're what's the word? They're accurate, but they're also like colourful and lovely. They're not scary diagrams. And
They're
thereby
not formal.
No, not
They're
clinical, medical.
Yes, they're very.
They're kind of, there's a warmth to them.
Yes.
Sounds like a good format because it's like the young people will ask the questions that maybe other people are thinking about, and then you answer them through the book.
Exactly, yeah. And I mean, there's so many, like, for anyone that, well, I don't know, will this be on camera or not, but you can see it, it's big.
That's your camera there.
Yeah, it's a big book. It's 440 pages, like, and that's it edited. It was bigger.
Congratulations on it.
Thank you, thanks so much. Yeah, no, I'm very proud of it. It was Ciara Coogan, just to mention, 'cause she's a wonderful Galway artist who did the illustrations, and it's Sexual Health West is the charity who commissioned the book. So I used to work for them, basically. So yeah, it is. I think it's, as far as we know, it's the first of its kind in Ireland. We don't know of any resource like this in Ireland. It goes into all different topics. Like, I don't think really anything is left out. Body image, porn, the anatomy, the body parts, protection, STIs, relationships, like, and more.
Do you know what? From listening to you, the information is coming into my mind, and I'm saying, right, there should be a class in secondary school and a book like this within that class, and they're going through the book, and it's educating these teenagers more around sex and how to be more aware of their bodies, but also be more aware of you having the actual option of saying yes and no at the same time.
100%.
You know,
yeah.
so like I don't know how far we are away from something like that happening in our education system, because it's still Stone Age, you know.
It is getting better. It is. They are redoing. It's always that thing of, okay, we've come a long way, but we've a way to go. Like, that's how I would see it. So if anyone has any contacts in the Department of Education,
most
if you're listening, no, but it is, and it's what I just don't like, what I come up against in my work, which is really frustrating, is sometimes sex is seen as this, like, this kind of I was going to say sexy topic, but that's not kind of this kind of like funny kind of novelty
not
topic.
real education stuff.
And I take great offense, but I completely reject that.
You've devoted your life to it, like.
And for a reason. Like, if you, like, when I think of, you know, even me having the vaginismus, me being in you know, physically, emotionally abusive relationship, very young, like, I'm not saying the book will solve all these problems, but having a resource like this, and then having classes as well that support the learning, it can change lives. Like, sex education, I fully believe changes lives. It could even save lives, because when you think of some of the suicide, self-harm that is attributed to people who are gay or trans, and they, you know, they're not accepted, or they don't know, or they're afraid to come out. You know, all of this shame is a killer. Shame kills people, and sex education is it's an antidote to some of that shame. That's the way I see it.
And where can people access the book, and where can people follow you?
So they can access the book sexualhealthwest.ie, and the good thing about it is, when you buy it, the proceeds actually go back into the charity who deliver sex education. So you're making a charity donation when you buy the book.
Brilliant.
Which is great. And then people can find me at, the simplest way to find me is gracealice.com is my website. And if we are finishing up, I just want to give a shout out to my brother Kevin in Istanbul, and because he put me onto this podcast. He told me he's a big fan. His fiance, hi Kevin. His fiance Ubaida, who's from Istanbul, they're getting married next month, actually.
Congratulations.
So we're going over there, so that's
Nice.
fab. So I just wanted to say hello.
Well, congratulations to them, and best of luck, and
Do
thanks
you know
for
what? It's
coming on
been
the
a
podcast.
very, very informative
I'm glad.
conversation,
I'm glad.
you know, and I'm sure a lot of people will get the courage to maybe look into a lot of stuff we spoke about today further, and they may contact you for some more information, or maybe some counselling around something that they may have an issue with.
100%. And just to say quickly on that, you know, like, if you do come to me, obviously, I mean, it's a professional service, it's all confidential, but also, you know, I don't try and sell people coaching packages, none of that. You can just come for one session. you know, we'll get to know each other, have a chat. I never push people on things. I'm not going to ask you, you know, and when do you have sex? What positions do you have sex in? Like, that's not how any of this is, you know. So just, you know, maybe take this, if it's been on your mind a while, take this as a sign that, like, you know, you can do something about it. There are people like me here to help you.
Yeah.
And there is help 100% for whatever you're going through.
And I suppose it's just about making that initial conversation and just breaking through that fear of talking about something that you wouldn't really talk about. And
it doesn't come
once you talk about it, your sex life could completely 360 where yourself and your partner are getting the pleasure both of you want to give each other, but you're not just knowledgeable around it, but you will give that information to them.
And then your sex life impacts all your other areas of your life. So your mental health, physical health and sexual health are all absolutely 100% fully linked. So we can't undermine how important it actually is. So I think, you know, if anyone is listening, just to know that they're essentially, and I always say this, no one's going to advocate for this except you. You have to advocate for yourself. I'm sure you say this yourselves about either addiction or mental health. You have to be, or you and your partner, if it's for your relationship, you have to just do it yourself. You have to make the first step. And that's the hardest part. People come to me, they're so nervous. And by the end of it, they're like, God, I actually, honestly, and I'm not just saying this trying to sell myself, they say, I feel so relieved. I feel like I've just opened something that's been built up for so long, and it wasn't as scary as I thought it would be. So that's really great to hear as well.
Great stuff. Thank you.
Thank
Sinead.
you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Sinead, great so share. Stan.